So you've just invested a lot of hours of the last weeks in this space and listening to rather long presentations from the rabbis. So we thought that today, in lieu of that, Rabbi Schatz and I would each give just a short burst of insight into Parashat Ha'azinu as a way of delivering some Torah today. As I said when the Torah reading began, Ha'azinu is a challenging parsha to learn, to kol hakavod to Yaakov, because it's very dense, thick, poetic Hebrew, filled with lots of phrases that don't appear anywhere else in the Torah and the whole Bible. So you could be a pretty fluent Hebrew speaker and have a hard time understanding this parsha. And it's written poetically. And one of the things that stands out about the poetry is doublets or couplets, phrases that are basically the same phrase, but are said more than once for emphasis. We do this in speech. We do it certainly in writing, and you certainly do it in poetry. I'll just point out a few because I don't want to unpack one in particular. So, for instance, the second verse of Ha'azinu, Ya'arof kamatar likhi, my lesson, likhi, will kind of come down like rain. And the next phrase, Tizal katal imrati, and my words will drip down like dew. It's the same phrase. In one verse it was rain, one verse it was dew. In one verse the verb was to kind of descend, another one was to trickle. Same thing. Next phrase, Kisirim ale desha, like showers on young grass. V'chirvivim ale esev. It even sounds the same, even though different words, and like droplets on a different word for grass. Okay? That appears throughout Ha'azinu, where it seems that the Torah is trying to say that for whatever is being communicated by Moses to the Israelites in this last speech, saying it twice emphasizes it, amplifies it, intensifies it. Everyone who reads Ha'azinu knows that, which means it's more interesting and more fun when a phrase that is clearly meant in the pshat, in the simple meaning of the text, to just be a doubling, is divided out as saying two entirely different things. Right? In the Midrashic tradition by the rabbis of the Talmudic era, and certainly in the Hasidic tradition, they all know that that's the intent of Ha'azinu. They know that that's what's going on, and therefore it's kind of wonderful when they say, yeah, I know it means this, but I'm going to say it means this instead. And I want to give you two versions of that in the opening line of Parashat Ha'azinu. The opening line of Parashat Ha'azinu is Ha'azinu hashamayim ba'adabera. Ha'azinu is the verb form of the word ozen, which means ear. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak. V'tishma ha'aretz imrei fi. And the land, the earth, the aretz, will hear the words of my mouth. The pshat seems to be that Moses is addressing the heavens, and Moshe is addressing the earth. Hey, heavens, listen up to my words. Hey, earth, listen up to my words. Okay? But it's basically saying I'm sharing something that is rich and important, and I want everyone to pay attention. Okay. I'm going to give you two ways in which significant rabbis throughout the generations have understood that, not to just mean a repetition of the same thing, but rather a very different thing. The first comes from a rabbi known as the Chatam Sofer. Some of you in the room were with me for the following story. On the shul trip we did this past year to Eastern Europe, we spent 36 exceedingly hot hours in the city of Bratislava, which is the capital of modern-day Slovakia. Bratislava, which was also known as Pressburg for many years, was a very significant center of Jewish learning, and the most famous rabbi to have lived in Bratislava was Rabbi Moshe Sofer, known by the name Chatam Sofer, which is an acronym, Chidushei Torat Moshe, the innovations of the Torah of Moshe. He's so famous that when you take the tram to the cemetery where he's buried, the name of the tram stop is the Chatam Sofer. That's the name of the tram stop in the city of Bratislava. He is one of the most famous people ever to live there. We visited his grave because one of the things that I like to do when I visit places where there was once a significant Jewish population is visit the kever, the graves of great sages, and then to do some teaching over the grave as a way of honoring the life of the person who was there. We did that several times throughout this trip. Bratislava had flooding issues. It's right on the Danube. And in the 140 or 50 years or so since the Chatam Sofer lived, they've had to build the city up because the low-lying areas were exposed to flood. So the modern Jewish cemetery in Bratislava is up on a hill, and the level of the land that was there when the Chatam Sofer lived and died is much lower. It's below the road, but there is a very well-preserved memorial that you kind of walk in, and then you go down, and you're in a very cool place because you're underground, and then from there, it's another series of steps down to where he's buried. We went there because he's a round person. I had prepared some teaching of the Chatam Sofer. I decided to teach a tshuva, a halachic responsum that he had written on the notion of finding love, particularly the challenge and the wonder of finding love a second time in your life if the first one didn't work out. We're in this almost like a catacomb above a catacomb. There's a Slovakian dude whose job it is to be the manager of this place and to allow people entry and exit. And in the middle of my teaching, he comes into the room where I'm teaching, and he hands me his phone, and he says, "There's a phone call for you." So what are you talking about? I'm underground in Bratislava. What do you mean there's a phone call for me? Who knows I'm here? He says, "Just talk." I start talking on the phone. I'm starting to have a conversation in Hebrew, English, and Yiddish with a woman. I don't know where she's from. I don't know if she's calling from Brooklyn or from Jerusalem or somewhere else, but she said that she was a direct descendant of the Chatam Sofer. In certain Orthodox circles, if you're a direct descendant of a certain rabbi, then you believe that a prayer said at that rabbi's grave has more impact. And she had apparently, I guess if you're a direct descendant of the Chatam Sofer, you know the phone number, the Slovakian guy who has the key to his grave. And she had called the previous day. Why? Because she had someone that she wanted to say a bracha for, someone who was ill, and she wanted it said at her great-great-great-great-grandfather's grave. And he said, yes, there's a group coming tomorrow, because he knew they were coming. So I'm talking to this woman, and she tells me the name of the person who is sick, and I interrupt the teaching, and I do a Misha Berach across space and time, and it was pretty extraordinary. It was an extraordinary moment to intone a Misha Berach prayer for a person who I didn't know, by the request of someone I didn't know, but trying to awaken the spirit of the Chatam Sofer who was buried there. And then that was over, and I continued the teaching. And so I've been looking for more commentaries by the Chatam Sofer since, because now I feel like I have a stronger connection to him, even though he wouldn't like that connection because he hated liberal Jews. He spent an enormous amount of his time railing against the 19th century emergence of non-Orthodoxy in Central Europe. So sorry, Chatam Sofer, even though you won't study me, I'll study you. Okay, so what does the Chatam Sofer say on this verse? He says, yes, of course I know that the pshat is that Moses is addressing the heavens and is also addressing the earth as a way of saying Moshe is addressing all of the universe. But he understands it differently. He says that the shamayim is not the heavens, but addressing people whose existence is up in the heavens. People who are upper-level thinkers, people who dwell in esoterica, people who can understand the most sophisticated texts of our tradition. Listen up, you elite of the Jewish people. Torah is for you. But then Moshe says, the next half, V'tishma ha'aretz imrei fi. Even if you're just of the land, you're not a scholar. You have less of a background. You think of yourself as a rather simple person, not in a bad way, just you're interested in simple things, right? You don't live up in the swirling, the swirling ethereal world of Torah. You're a down-to-earth, earthly person. Torah speaks to you as well. It's a really interesting commentary by someone who was an elitist. He was a tremendous scholar. He didn't have a lot of patience for people who did Judaism light, L-I-T-E, right? And yet in this teaching, he's saying that Moses' last articulation to the Jewish people is that every Jew has an inheritance in this material. You might be a person whose head is always in the heavens. You daven, you study, and Jewish practice is everything that you spend your time focusing on. Or you might be a simple Yid who knows that your Jewish identity means something to you, even though you can't articulate it. Torah speaks to you as well. I love that message, and I hope it is a message that people in this community experience as well, that we try to offer things that are present for those who have the capacity and the interest for upper level thinking about the Jewish condition. And this community is open to any Jew who experiences some kind of connection or pleasure by being in our midst. In that way, we are living out the Chatam Sofer's interpretation of Parashat Hazino, even though he wouldn't have wanted to be associated with us. But how does one do that? Whether you're a heavenly Jew or an earthly Jew, whether you're a scholar or approach Judaism more simply, how do you end up finding meaning in these words? For that, I want to give you a interpretation of that opening line by the Kligfeld Rabbi, the great Hasidic sage from the center of Poland, the town of Kutsk. He reads Hashamayim differently than Pshat, which is Moses addressing the heavens, differently than Chatam Sofer that says that Moses was addressing those whose heads are in the heavens. He reads Hashamayim, even though it's a noun, as an adjective, actually as an adverb. And what he reads it as, Ha'azinu Hashamaymi. Listen up in a heavenly way. Listen up as if this material has something to offer you. If you lean in, Hashamaymi, in a way that is the most exalted, the most beautiful, the Adabera, then I, God, can speak to you, that I have something to say to you. If you're blocked from Torah, Torah will not penetrate. If your cynical mind, which we all have on some level, is convinced that there's no richness in this material, guess what? You will be a prophet, and there'll be no richness in this material. But if you listen, the Kutsker says, Hashamaymi, on the assumption that there is meaning and direction and purpose found in these ancient words, you will hear God speaking to you, even though you won't be able to predict in advance what that experience will be like. There are moments when I'm aware of how important this teaching is, where I close my own mind, my own soul, to novel understandings of what Judaism can say to me. I'm not done learning, but sometimes I convince myself that I am. And when that cynical facade comes up, I start to feel the light waning from the Torah. That's my fault, not the Torah's fault. That's my limitation, not the Torah's limitation. If we lean in this coming year, Hashamaymi, in a heavenly way, then whether we are heaven people or earth people, the Torah can play a significant role in our lives, and our lives will be enriched as a result. Rabbi Schatz.
So we're going to look at a different verse from Hazinu. We're going to look at the first verse from the second Aliyah, which is chapter 32, verse 7. You don't have to look at it if you don't want to, but that's the verse that I'm going to read in just a moment. The verse is Zechor Yamot Olam Binu Shnot Dor Vador. So remember the days of old, or remember the days of the world. Binu, similar to the word lehavin, to understand or to consider the years, perhaps, of the generations of Dor Vador, like the words Lador Vador that we sing from the generations and the generations that will come after. She'al avicha, you should ask your parent, v'yagedcha zeknecha, and you should then Sha'al avicha ve'gedcha, that's how it's broken down, that you should ask them and they're going to tell you. And then, zkenecha ve'amru lach, then the elders amongst you are going to actually tell you. So you're going to ask a question of your parent, and then the elders amongst you are going to tell you. What does that imply? What? Yeah, there's conversation, there's discourse. It also implies that your parents are not your elders necessarily, right? That you're asking your parents something and they're going to tell you, but then it's also saying that your elders are going to inform you, right? So it might be that they're one and the same. It also might be that, similar to this idea of discourse or conversation, you have to ask a lot of different people. You have to be in conversation asking lots of different folks whatever it is that you're asking. So I want to share two different commentaries on this phrase. If you heard my High Holiday sermon, this is probably why her sermons. This is probably why I am thinking about this right now. I think there's something very powerful at the end of Moshe's life, that instead of just saying, "This is all the wisdom I have to give to you," similar to how Rabbi Kligfeld just ended, I still have what to learn from the people around me, and I hope that you recognize in your lifetime that you will go on even until the end and still be learning from the people around you. And the interesting piece about this verse itself is that it's not one way, right? It doesn't say, oh, just learn from your elders, just learn from the people who came before you. It also assumes that you're learning from the people who might be your peers, who might just be living at the same time as you, that it's not just about learning from the past or from those who have had experiences before you, but that it's also about learning in the moment. So what Rashi says is that if you've set your intention to the past, meaning that you are doing this Zachor Yamot Olam, you're remembering that which has come before you, you should at least consider the years of the generation, this dor vador, so that you become conscious of what might happen in the future, right? This is that phrase that we use all the time, that history repeats itself, right? That we should learn from the generations that came before us, of course, because we should know what's going to potentially happen if something seems to be a repeat of what has happened in the generations before us. But then there's this commentary that I actually learned from Rabbi Adir Yolkut, who was here because his wife Lauren was the chazanit, the second chazanit in many of our services. And it's from Menachem Tzion, who was a 16th century Kabbalist. I guess we're in a very Kabbalistic, Hasidic mindset this Shabbos. And this is what he says on this phrase. He says, yeah, of course we should understand history and take the lessons of history and apply it to our generation. Of course we should recognize that things repeat themselves and we should learn from the past. But also, binu shnot dor vador, homiletically, the word shanot is derived not from the word shana. So when we see that the translation says the years past, or the years of the generations before us, that's actually not a correct translation, but it's actually from the word shoneh, which means different. And so the meaning that we should understand from this is that our understanding, that which we learn in our lifetime, changes from one generation to the next. A person cannot blindly apply the same rules that worked in the past to the present situation. If one tries, they will fall short. Each generation is different. A person cannot glibly say, that's the way it was, therefore that's the way it has to be. Binu shnot dor vador means to take that lesson of history, to understand the past, but then also keep in mind the changes from generation to generation. Times change, people change, and circumstances change. And sometimes a person has to then alter and redirect and not merely go with what was. So I wanted to share this because it reminded me of Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'Nashuva Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, which we said a lot over the high holidays, but we also say every time we put the Torah back. And it's this phrase that reminds us that, of course, we want to return to God. We want to return. We want to do tshuva. We want to ask those questions and receive those tshuvot, receive those answers. But the idea of Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem is that we then return to these days that came before us, but we return to them new. We return to them differently. And so I think what Moshe is teaching us at the end of his life is that in order for us to return each and every day, able to do tshuva, able to become new people, able to, yes, take the past, but also make a future and recognize our present, is that we have to be able to understand everything around us and have that memory and ask those questions and be in those conversations, because without that, we're either too stuck in our present and not aware of what has come before us, and therefore not able to create a fine future, or we're too stuck in our past and not able to recognize that which is in front of us for us to make some change.